First person, $100 million in annual revenue from today. Second person, Vlad, I think 30 million. And I'm the guy who gets asked to talk about failure. That's my job. Nice to meet you. My name is Sahil. This is my Twitter handle. If I say anything awesome, you can use that, SHL. That's like the Web 2.0 version of my name. If I say anything stupid, you can use my full name. It's somebody else. These are the questions that I wrestled with when I started thinking about the past and tried to sum up those 8 years of building Gumroad into this thing that it didn't become. And these are the sort of the things that I want you to think about as you think about what you want to do and how you want to spend your time. These are the ways that I sort of define myself and the ways that I think about, where I want to be over the course of the next several decades. And so I think, I'm going to talk about my story, and hopefully you'll see some of those, the answers to the questions that you have in them. The story starts at Pinterest. I was born working at Pinterest. I was the second employee at Pinterest. I built and designed Pinterest for iPhone. I was 18. I dropped out of school. I went to USC. My parents paid $500,000 to get me into it, and I left. USC is never in the news for a good reason. I used to have a USC slide in here, and I took it out. But I went to USC for computer science and engineering, and then started or continued making apps. I'd started in high school based off a course on iTunes University from Stanford. Started making iPhone apps, put them on the internet. One of them did pretty well on Hacker News, and Ben, the CEO of Pinterest, sent me an email while I was a freshman at USC saying, hey, we have this thing that we're building. It's called Pinterest. We help people collect, organize, and share the things that they love. Do you want to make Pinterest for iPhone? And I said, sure. And he said, cool, let me know next time you're up in the Bay Area, and we can chat about it. And they didn't pay for my flights or anything like that. They're just like, just let us know. And so there was I think a USC Cal game, a football game that my friends wanted to go to, and I said, sure, I'll come up, and then I'll just like skip out for a few hours and hang out with the team from Pinterest. And so that's how that happened. Not to my credit at all. VCs love to ask me, like, how did you find Pinterest? Like, so early before all of us did, and I didn't. Like, they found me. That's point number one. And point number two, I'm not misogynistic. While I was at Pinterest, I had the idea for a company. I thought it would be quite large, as I shared publicly. Just had an idea for my first billion-dollar company. This is nice. I'm glad that I shared this because it gives me this sort of like stake in the ground where I can kind of compare myself to this past version of me. I don't think I would tweet that today. I personally love the word first in here. It's like I just, first kid, first marriage. And so I built Gumroad that weekend. Just as a weekend project, I had the idea I wanted to sell this product that I had made on the internet to my sort of meager Twitter audience at the time, and there was no real easy way for me to do that. And luckily, I can design and code, so I could like build like a little page on my website, like maybe put a PayPal button at the bottom, but all this stuff that like most people won't do if they're interested in seeing if something can work. And so I built this thing called Gumroad that basically was Bitly plus a credit card form. That's sort of how I pitched it in 2011. Built it using Stripe, which was a friend of mine's company. I think we were like user number 40 or something of Stripe. And it did pretty well. Got to the top of Hacker News again. Hacker News appears several times in my life, for better or worse. And so does TechCrunch, as you'll see. But that did really well. 50,000 people saw it on the first day. And it kind of just became a thing that like became part of every conversation. It sort of like infected me. And every time I met someone, I was figuring out some way to think about how Gumroad was going to solve the problem that we were discussing for artists or musicians or startups or anything like that. Pretty soon after I left Pinterest, in hindsight, financially not the best decision I've ever made. I had 0.75% of that company and left with 2 or 3 months left of vesting. So you can do the math on that. I have. But it's fine. I raised $1 million from a bunch of investors, basically out of the gate. This is like the first sentence of that article, but a bunch of Silicon Valley folks. It was just me at the time, this 19-year-old kid. They like hyping that up. And then a few months later, I raised another $7 million because I could. And so at this point, $8 million. I'm 19, no employees. I actually told TechCrunch that we had a couple employees just because I didn't want, I wanted some personality there, not just some dude going crazy. So yeah, and basically 6 months, 2 years ago, I was a senior in high school, and now I had raised $8 million, and I was on this journey. And you've seen this story before, right? You see the college dropout, young, first startup, raise a bunch of money, and then kills it, does the thing. You've seen that with Facebook and Apple and Microsoft, and that's sort of the story that I was telling myself. I think that was the story that got me excited about technology and startups and software in the first place. And things continue to do well. The graph was up and to the right, and in hindsight, it sort of tricks you into thinking that it's a good graph. And I think if I was building a thing, bootstrapped it, it would have been great, but I wasn't, and I was trying to build this thing into this unicorn, as they say. And I think the problems are sort of really indicated at that first spike in November 2014. That's when Eminem launched an album, I believe, on Gumroad. And so, things were going well, but not well enough. And I think that's sort of the thing to know about venture. And I don't think venture capitalists are evil. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with trying to sort of aim for the stars and land in the moon or whatever people say. But you just have to be aware that you got to be growing really, really, really fast. This number is not the important part, but the important part is that every month needs to be up and to the right. And when you go back and look at this graph, even though the trend itself is positive, you can see that that last bar and 11 months before that, roughly the same. And if you're trying to build a venture funded company, these are the folks that try to invest in things like Uber and Pinterest and Slack, et cetera. These numbers are not that exciting to those people. And Josh Koppelman, one of our investors from first round, awesome guy. He has this line: "There's nothing like numbers to fuck up a good story," and that sort of sums up a lot of the fundraising process for me. We raised money at the beginning. You can't even see the bar. I think we did $30,000 in gross merchandise volume, money processed through the system. And I think in hindsight, $20,000 of it was fraud. Nothing. And it's easier to go out and raise money when you have nothing, because you can just sort of ignore that part of the business and say, look, this is what we're building, this is the potential. The minute you have numbers and you're sort of trying to position that, that's the only thing that matters. And when you have numbers, the story is sort of unveiled to have a lot more holes in it than it seems. And so that's sort of why I raised that $7 million was, we had just raised 1.1 actually, because Max Levchin has a minimum investment criteria of $200,000, which think about that. He won't invest less than, this is a human being. Bonkers. So we raised 1.1, and I think at the time of our Series A, we had 1.87 or something, in the bank, $13,000 in legal fees or whatever. But Josh told me this. I called him up and I was like, what should I do? Like, I have this, I was giving this update to Kleiner and they invited me into the office and I pitched the partnership and then I pitched Index and I have these 2 term sheets. I've had 2 meetings, 2 term sheets. Do I go out and talk to more investors or what do I do? And he's like, you've been spending like the last 6 months like talking to investors. Like, you should actually like build this product. And just like keep this in mind, like there's nothing like numbers to fuck up a good story. And if you have a great story, which I did, so I can employ at Pinterest, I can design and code, I'm relatively personable, I'm a dude. These things sort of like feed into this pattern matching algorithm. It's like you can do this thing that very few people will ever get to do. And I don't think this is like a legitimate reason to really raise money, but I get to be a Series A funded startup, a founder of one of those things. I get to sort of like up the safety net in which if this thing falls, like that's where I land, and as like this 19-year-old kid at the time, like that's pretty tempting because if I didn't do that and then Gumroad went nowhere and I just had left Pinterest, it was just like, why did I do that? I need to make sure that decision to leave Pinterest was not stupid. A lot of people ask me what worked and what didn't work. Like, if you could go back in time, what would you do differently? Sort of that question phrased in many, many different ways. And the answer is pretty difficult. We shipped a lot of features. We shipped Pay with PayPal, which was something I swore I would never ship because I didn't want to work with PayPal. I increased our monthly volume by around 20% in a single month. We shipped physical purchasing. We shipped analytics. We shipped an affiliate program, and another thing that I thought I would never do. These things that all sort of were in the vein of like trying to like take that graph, and this was like January 2015. We had started talking to investors and had a pretty good feeling that our numbers weren't good enough. This wasn't necessarily like kind of a surprise to us as a company and a team. And so we sort of pivoted the whole company around this sort of move the needle hashtag. Everything we worked on was to move the needle. And everything worked to some degree. We shipped all of these amazing features, and I'm very glad, and I'm sure our creators appreciated the time and effort that we spent on it, those sort of 9 months. But nothing worked sort of like fundamentally like changed the game for us. And when you raise venture, and when you're trying to build sort of a rocket ship, like every year needs to at least double, ideally triple, and ideally more than that. I was looking through a lot of the notes that I would share with the team as I met with investors when we were thinking about raising our Series B. Luckily we raised $7 million, so I didn't have to think about that for 3 years. But then all of a sudden I did. And one investor said, you're growing around 7% a month. And the other companies we're talking to sort of in this band, this vertical, this stage, are growing around 10 to 20% a month. And that's a lot of what it comes down to, is just the numbers. You're building a business. It's like this made-up concept that we invented, and it just moves money around in a way that hopefully benefits society. And if it doesn't do that sort of efficiently, the people that are paid to manage other people's money and take $10 million and turn it into $30 million 10 years from now, like they're not going to invest. It's sort of that's their job. They have a job. That's what they do. That's what they get paid for. And so I don't hold anything against any of these people. But it is, it's just good to sort of know that. And so this is sort of how I sum up that lesson. It doesn't matter how awesome your product is, how awesome your team is, how fast you're shipping stuff, because at the end of the day, there's sort of a cap on your growth, which is roughly the market you're in. And often, we had product market fit. You saw that graph, right? Like it was doing well. It was growing almost every quarter. It just wasn't growing fast enough. And we're helping digital content creators sell content on the internet. It's just not that large of a market. Even today, this is many years later, and I'll show a graph updating in a bit. It's just not that large of a market. It's very difficult to build a meaningful billion-dollar company in a market that cannot sort of physically sustain it. So just sort of be mindful of that. Again, this is like one of those things where I'm like, I don't know if I wish, like if I knew this, I might not have built this thing that I really love working on today. And I wouldn't have met all these amazing people, and like my life wouldn't be what it is today. And so I'm not saying like I wish I knew this, but this is a thing I didn't know. I don't know if I can't predict what would have happened if I did know this. So it is it is what it is. So anyways, we spent 9 months in this like mega crunch from January 2015 to around September, October. And the thing that I think I did super well when I ran the company was I was always super open and transparent with investors, with employees, with customers. I was always pretty good about sort of being open and transparent, which you can probably tell from giving a talk like this. And so when we had to sort of get to this point where we're like, the business in its current state is sort of default dead. We had around $400,000 in the bank. We're burning around $350,000 a month. Math, not in our favor. So there's sort of like, there's like 3 things you can do sort of in a situation like this. As I list, you can shut it down. You can sort of sell the company and give it to someone who can afford the losses for a long period of time, sort of a strategic acquisition, which is really just an acqui-hire. And we had a bunch of those conversations with Square and Medium and even Patreon and Kickstarter. Or you can aim for sustainability, and that's the one that we ended up choosing, because I think that the fact that I had to make a choice, that I had to pick among these 3 options, was the problem. I was sort of forced to make this timely decision in a way that I just don't think is probably good for making decisions, and so I sort of decided to take control of our own destiny. And when we raised money, when we hired the team and built that out, I was always very clear that we were building this thing for this specific group of people that we called creators at the time, which now is like a sexy word, but before people were like, what does that even mean? We were for creators, and then we were for the team, and then we were for investors. And hopefully there's alignment there, right? Like most of the time there is alignment. The team wants the same outcome as the VCs, want the same outcome as your customers. That's great and ideal, but sometimes there's not. Sometimes there's a misalignment, and when that misalignment happens, I'm gonna go with the creators. And so we did this aggressive round of layoffs, and it worked. Turns out when you let 15 people go, you can get to profitability pretty fast. And it was actually like some people say, I was like 21, I think, maybe 22 at the time, laying off 15 people, like some of my best friends. This is like my entire like social network, and my sort of like entire career experience. And it was honestly amazing, because it really just showed me like how much like this thing that I built, that I this culture, this team, like was still in it for the creators. It was just, one, it was easy because I'd sort of communicated, hey, this is gonna be really hard if we don't hit these numbers in 9 months, which we didn't hit. It was sort of, the writing was on the wall. So it wasn't a surprise to anybody. And that's another quote that I love from one of my investors, is that if your employees are surprised, like, you should consider that a failure on your part, because you should have communicated. Like, if you fire someone and they're shocked by that decision, like, that's on you, not on them. And I remember after the layoffs, an employee came up to me and was like, that must have been so difficult. And I was like, I fired you, I wasn't really expecting like this sort of like empathy and sympathy, but it turns out that's what you get when you're honest and you're sort of hopefully building the company the right way. So anyways, these are the numbers. We went from burning $351,000 to a net profit of $10,000. And that $10,000, like if I could like scale the font size up on like my emotional reaction to it, it would be like the whole screen. You'd see like a little bit of like a 0 or something, because like what that does is it took our runway from like finite to infinite. It gave me an unlimited time to make decisions on what I wanted to do with Gumroad. And I didn't really appreciate when I was in that sort of the treadmill, as some folks call it, of trying to build this thing where you're basically playing double or nothing, right? You're raising a bunch of money, so in 18 months you can raise more money, so in 18 months you can raise more money, so in 18 months you can sell the company or you get profitable, and the numbers sort of like eventually work out. But you always feel like you're treading water. Like it's possible certainly, but like the sort of the default state you're in is this is not working, which sort of contrasts with the idea that everyone thinks you're doing great because you just raised a bunch of money and you're 18 or whatever years old. I actually got a DM on Twitter yesterday that said something like, and maybe in the Q&A I'll read it. It said something like, "I used to hate you." I didn't know, and then sort of in parentheses, like, I didn't know who you were, by the way, but I read this thing about you when you were a kid, and I hated you for the success you seemingly had. Thank you for sharing your story, et cetera. I don't hate you anymore. I was like, cool. I was in TechCrunch again. It turns out there's like basically two reasons TechCrunch writes about you. And really, basically any press. You want to be in the news, you have some announcement that you want to make, fundraising, et cetera. Or TechCrunch writes about you without you letting them know about anything, which is typically bad news. And so the layoffs were actually, as I mentioned, like not the worst thing in the world. It was sort of just like part of the life of a startup, and I really felt like that sort of up and to the right thing was going to continue. And it was just going to have this like trough of sorrow for like 3 or 4 years, and then it would be back to smooth ship, and no one would ever have to know. I could just sort of like pretend that everything was fine. And then this article comes out, and this sort of like ruined my life because I had always been like this like pretty public, open person, and I was fine. I was like, okay, I'm gonna just like be quiet, just gonna stop tweeting, and 3 years later, like I'll start tweeting again. I'll be great. And then I get this email from Matthew, who's like, hey, I just heard about the layoffs. We're going to write about it tomorrow. Do you want to comment? And I said something like, I don't know, things are going to be fine. But it's just like, it sucked because all of a sudden, like this story that I had that I was sort of like I was like playing this character in this TV show or something, and then like that wasn't true anymore. And the sort of the harder thing about it was I didn't know who knew about this. And so I'd meet with someone, and I didn't know like what to communicate to that person about where, like I had this story that was in my head. I didn't know what was in their head. I didn't want to like talk about the layoffs if they didn't know about it. And so it was just like this kind of like this dissonance was like grinding at my soul. Gumroad, on the other hand, continued to kill it. This is up until December of last year. It's doing even better now. It continues to do something like this, which is like pretty awesome. This is the amount of money that we pay creators every month. And last month we did like 5.8 or 9 or something $million. And this is all open, so you can go on Twitter and see all this stuff. So that that sort of puts this other thing in the works of like this company that I'd built, this product that we had built. I shouldn't say I. Continued to do well, but like I was a failure. But also I didn't know like which story like people were like when they thought of Gumroad and me, like which one did they see? Did they see this one, or did they see the TechCrunch article, or what have you? And living in San Francisco, you're meeting a lot of people that are familiar with Gumroad and my story, and they'd seen this article like from 3 years ago or from 7 years ago or who knows what. And so I just had a hard time, and I was spending a lot of money on rent, and I'd meet with founders, and I wasn't really recruiting. It was just like awkward, basically. And then Trump won the election, and so every conversation I had was like a combination of like, I'm not really a startup person anymore, but I'm pretending, or we're talking about Trump, and I don't have to pretend to be a startup person anymore, but then we're talking about Trump. So I left. I moved to the widest place on earth for a couple of different reasons. But I just needed to get out of San Francisco. And there's sort of like 2 steps to every decision. There's like the thing that makes you open to the decision, and then there's the thing that attracts you to make the decision. You can probably guess the first one. I just needed to get out and save money on rent. When I did the math, and I save around $4,000 a month living in Provo. That's a lot of money. And I wanted to just like, I was not doing the thing that I had planned to do, and the way I sort of justified that life to myself was I have all of this time to like grow as a human being, and I certainly wasn't growing as a human being living in San Francisco. And so I would live in a conservative place. I would learn to drive. I would ski and snowboard. I would write and paint, and I would just learn. I had this asset that very few people have, which is time. I had this awesome business that was paying all my bills. I was paying myself $10,000 a month, and I could just do whatever I wanted. So I started painting, I started writing. This is a painting I did on the left of a dude. I don't know what else to say. And that's the sort of cover art for a science fiction short story that I wrote. But I just got really into these things that I could sort of like measure the growth of. It's kind of like going to the gym. Actually, it's basically identical to going to the gym or training for a marathon. Like you just do the thing, and then you get better every day. And with startups, that's not true. Like you might do the thing, and you don't get better every day. Your business implodes on itself. And so when the market is sort of like controlling, or any real external force is controlling the sort of the way that you're measuring success, I think it's pretty nice to have a thing that I can control. As long as I wake up, I go to this head painting session, and I paint this person for 3 hours, I win. I went to the gym in a painting sense. And writing is kind of the same thing. It's just training a muscle. You get better all the time as long as you do it. And so I just got really into these hobbies, and I think I improved a lot in a couple years. And then this thing kind of happened out of the blue, relatively out of the blue. Kleiner Perkins emailed me. They led our Series A, you might recall. And so at this point, just to give you a sense of the sort of the financial state of the company, we're doing, I don't know, $50,000 in profit a month, not bad, but we also had raised, those $8 million, $8.1 million in sort of two priced rounds, and then we raised a $2 million bridge from Kleiner at a 4x liquidation preference. So we had around $17.5 million in preferences, which basically means if I sell the company for all of that plus $1, I get $1, or like my percentage of $1. And that's fine. I mean, I signed up for that. I wasn't like tricked or anything, but it basically meant that like my ownership, sort of two things. One, my ownership in Gumroad would basically be worth nothing. But then two, I sort of still had this promise, right? Like Kleiner had still invested in a company. They were still on the board. And I sort of had this like obligation to like try at some point. Like I was learning to paint and write, and I moved to Provo. But at some point, I would sort of like start this journey again, or sell the company, right? Like basically, I had to get out of the system or get out of Gumroad because Gumroad had signed up for this thing, et cetera, et cetera. So, anyways, I got this email from Kleiner. It says, "Hey, we'd like to sell our ownership back to Gumroad for $1. Pretty good deal." So I said, "Sure, yes, we can discuss." And so, yeah, we had this call, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, just like we said in the email, we'd like to buy back or sell our ownership back for $1." And I said, they were like, "Are you okay with that?" And I said, as like normally as I could, like, "Sure, yeah, that sounds great." And that's it. Like, there's no like drama. It's basically like Kleiner, I think, had left, sort of reached the end of life. Mike Abbott, our partner at Kleiner, had left. So he, they would either have to find a new partner for the board. Or they would have to do that, and then also like just they can take the hit on their taxes and sort of put it up as the loss. And so, just made sense. Gumroad wasn't really going anywhere, and I credit Kleiner for this decision. It's one of the reasons I talk about it publicly, even though I don't know if there's anything to learn from this, because I think they deserve it for doing something that I really appreciate. Sort of saved Gumroad, maybe. But still, so that happened. It's great. A couple other investors did the same, and we bought back a couple other ones. But I was still like running this thing, and I sort of had the story was still in my head of like trying to build this billion-dollar company, like Bill Gates and all these sorts of people. And I recall this conversation that happened. This is one of the other things that you get when you raise money from Kleiner. You get invited to CEO summits and shake hands with Al Gore. Yeah, there was this interview that John Doerr did with Bill Gates, and he asks, this is like when Microsoft is only worth $200 billion and Apple is worth like 300 or 400 and sort of skyrocketing, and the iPhone and all that jazz. And he asks Bill, like, do you feel like bad, basically? Like, do you build this company that's, sure, it's worth $200 billion, but like this personal computing industry is, I don't know, the value of that, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to humanity. Like, how do you feel about that? And Bill says something along the lines of this, that's true. That's what companies do. They create value for the world, and then their revenue model is sort of capturing some segment of that value, and that's sort of what revenue is. And Some companies capture 80% of the value they create, like enterprise SaaS or something like that, I don't know. And then some companies capture very, very little. And it really spoke to me, this sort of dichotomy of like creating value and capturing value. And I was always focused on capturing value because of just the stories that I had heard and the sort of the net worth that everyone was sort of being measured on, or the number of employees, or how much money you'd raise, which always sort of fed back into like how much are you worth, sort of tying net worth to self-worth in a way that I think is like sort of pretty one-dimensional and wrong. And so I started trying to think about how I would create value. And so one of the things I started doing was, I'll just like share the numbers. Like there's no downside to this, right? Like we're profitable. Even if our numbers go down, like we're not trying to hire people, we're not trying to raise money. Like we don't have to sort of hold the cards close to our chest. Maybe people can learn from this. And so I just started sharing the numbers publicly on Twitter. The other reason I did this is because I was sort of like emailing our investors every month, like, hey, these are the numbers. And so I just sent them an email saying, hey, I'm now tweeting this email. So you can either follow me on Twitter or don't. I don't care. But I'm not going to send this email. Like my sort of financial obligation is now fulfilled in this new way. So there was that sort of like cost savings aspect to it as well. But yeah, it was awesome. I mean, I was like sort of found this new outlet. I was able to create value in this way that I'd sort of never considered. I was always about like just shipping product, and that was it. That was like the value creation, and our revenue was our sort of metric of doing that. And I had this like sort of like multi-dimensional way of looking at this thing that was amazing. And so I started doing other stuff. I started trying to like figure out, okay, how many businesses exist because of Gumroad? So Austin from Lambda School, he started Lambda School using the earnings he made from his Gumroad products. He wrote a book, put it on Gumroad, made a couple $100,000, and then built Lambda School. They've raised a bunch of money at this point. So there's like, it's basically impossible to measure, but like there's more stuff happening because of what we've built than has sort of shifted back into our valuation or our revenue numbers or anything. And there's a lot of stories like this. ConvertKit is another company that has like a very similar story that's doing $10 million in ARR. So who knows? Those are just a few of the stories that I know. I'm sure there are a lot more out there. They're all the kids that get to go to a better college because of Gumroad earnings and all sorts of cool stuff that I'm sure will pay dividends for as long as humanity exists, until the heat death of the universe. We launched this thing called the Gumroad Creators Fund. Basically, we had profits. I sort of wasn't really willing to commit myself back to the company full time, and so I was like, cool, I have this money, I don't need it. What can we do? Let's give it away to creators. Let's find other ways of creating this value. And so we sort of had this open application process. Anyone can apply. You don't have to be a Gumroad creator necessarily. You just have to sort of define yourself as a creator, which basically everybody is. And we gave away all these cool things, tickets and open source software licenses. And this guy went to Mexico City to do some journalism stuff. So just cool stuff. And I have this video of this one person who we sent like $400. Is it gonna work? Nope, it's playing on my laptop. Never mind. It's great. Huh? Oh, that is very smart.
It's a little early in the morning. I have no makeup on. I don't have my hair done. I don't even have my contacts in yet. But I just got this email, and I wanted to say I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Like, I can't say thank you enough. We're gonna do some really fun things with this. I can't wait to go find a couple of people to take with me to this conference. Pumped! Thank you. Thank you so much. This is gonna be awesome. Peace.
Peace. Cool. Yeah, and that was like the coolest video I'd ever seen in my whole life. $400 isn't world-changing for a lot of people. Certainly not in New York or San Francisco, but it means a lot. It can go really, really, really far. And VC-funded companies can't do stuff like that because when they're looking for that double or nothing sort of growth, or double growth like that. They're sort of making those sorts of bets, like sending $400 to this random person is not going to do anything to help them raise a Series B. And so you sort of end up with this like weird thing where these companies that could do it don't do it because the incentives are totally wrong. And I was in this position to just do stuff like that. And then people are like, holy crap, I can't believe you're doing stuff like this. It's like the most amazing thing. And I was like, I guess it's not really, but lots of companies do this. They just aren't on the front page of TechCrunch or anything like that. There's plenty. It's like calling a company profitable. This is like it's a conference for profitable companies, which like to most people would be like redundant. So yeah, it's I remember writing this article and I was like, I'm gonna make this point. I'm gonna tell everyone that like building a $1 billion company is probably not the best goal you could have for yourself. And I was like trying to like pitch it to people in Provo, like where I was living, and they're just like, what? Like, who are you? I thought you just paint heads. Which, by the way, is another really important part of breaking my identity was like literal distance. But yeah, that's sort of the point. And another tweet. This is sort of like the midpoint of the character arc. I write fiction, so I pay attention to this sort of stuff. I can't wait until I'm successful so I can write about failure. A little bit more self-awareness going on. Still a little bit cocky, but less so. But sort of just sums up, I think, a lot of the experience is that you sort of are in this place in which you can talk about a lot of this stuff, but you don't. And then you're in you either make it and then you never talk about this stuff because it sort of like interrupts this sort of hero's journey that you've been on, or you fail and then you feel embarrassed this whole time. And Gumroad, through a variety of circumstances, sort of escaped that, one of those sort of two paths, and like ended up in this third way through no fault or credit of my own. And so I can talk about it. I want to leave you with one more thing. This is from a Gumroad creator. We hosted this creators dinner just to thank all the creators in Utah. There's a lot of them. They're almost all women, which is kind of fascinating. Utah conservative, most conservative. I was living in the most conservative city in America. I would not expect that. That's what it is. So just think about that. But anyway, I invited her to sort of just like share a little bit, and she told me at this dinner that she was jealous of me. She was making a lot of money on Gumroad, more than I was making from Gumroad, and we had this meeting when I first moved to Provo, because that's one way I build my network, is I just email everyone that uses my software in a certain city and make friends that way. And she said, yeah, I came away from that meeting, it had been sort of over a year at this point, jealous. Like, I was like writing content and doing this thing, and sure, I was making a few $100,000 a year, but like you had built this amazing thing that was empowering all of these people. And I was like the sort of exact opposite, thinking the same sort of thing. And so anyway, she shared this quote that I love, enough is a decision, not an amount. And it kind of goes back to that whole, when I'm successful sort of quote. It's a choice. It sounds stupid and cliche and kind of like a VC Twitter tweet. But it is what it is. I do think a large amount of sort of your experience is your perspective on that experience, and you can sort of decide that you're good, that you're fine, and that's sort of where I'm at now. People ask me like, what's next? And sure, there's plenty of stuff we're working on that I could delineate and go into all these cool stuff, and I truly am really excited about a lot of it. But that's all gravy. That's all icing. Because life is pretty good the way it is. Thanks for listening.
Questions?
Questions would be great.
Raise your hand if you have a question.
So one thing I'm curious about is actually not related to Gumroad at all. It's more Twitter, and I know you use Twitter a lot, and I think a lot of people would say they struggle with Twitter. It's like really good for distribution. It's really good to get your ideas out, and even people like Sam Harris are like, sometimes you become like a different person when you're on Twitter. And I'm wondering to what extent you've found that, and what your relationship is with Twitter.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's complicated. Yeah, I mean, I'm not me on Twitter. Like, I'm a character on Twitter, and like everyone else is a character on Twitter too. You can't not be, you know? Like you can like Twitter is not like a very like sort of high throughput, high information throughput platform. It's not built for that, and that's fine. It's a game. That's how I play it. And you know, as long as you know that you're not like, I'm not trying to have a conversation on Twitter. I'm not trying to like convince anybody on Twitter. I just say funny, interesting things that I think about, and see how the world reacts to those things, and I end it there. And I think any more than that is, in my opinion, mostly a waste of time. And you have to understand that this it's just a game. Everyone is playing it. Everyone's marketing themselves, and like that's Austin actually was the one who really like told me that. He's from Utah, and sort of like I was like, oh yeah, it's just a game that everyone's playing. It is great for distribution, as you said, and that's all it is for me. It's just advertising, distribution, marketing. Everyone has an agenda, and you should just like be okay with that, or don't use Twitter, you know. And like politicians, celebrities, everybody has a goal, and if you don't have a goal and you're using Twitter, then it's like you're the loser in the game, you know. So yeah, it's something I learned, I think, in the last couple of years as I started finding success and playing the game a little bit and being like, oh, okay, this is what it is. Cool, you know. Yeah.
Hey, also about Twitter.
Great.
Do you schedule tweets, and about how long do you take to write a tweet on average?
Yeah. Do I schedule tweets? I used to schedule tweets. I go back and forth. Normally, I schedule tweets if I have too many, like, ideas at the same time, which is often what happens. Like I'm on a flight, or it's like midnight, and I just have like 30 different tweet ideas at the same time, and then I'll like write them down in Apple Notes, and then I'll try to schedule them. But in general, I don't schedule them. I just tweet when I have the idea. No, I would say average, like as long as it takes to write the tweet, typically. Those are the ones that do best, anyways. Like the ones that I really like slave over and I try to like nail the messaging, like fall flat completely. So I don't try. I try not. Obviously, I do try, right? It would be a lie to say that I don't try. But you said that, not me. It's yeah. I try not to try, I should say. I'm sort of aware of it. Yeah. You, Tess.
So I was just wondering, do you ever think about, or could you have built Gumroad without ever going to that funding? When you have the skills, how far could you go with it?
Yeah. So how far I could have gone without raising money? It's really hard to say. You know, I think there is this attitude, sort of the Reid Hoffman, sort of Gary Tan line of thinking, which is if you don't do it, someone else is going to do it and then kill you, or like sort of seize the opportunity before you can. I don't know if I necessarily buy that. I think there are certain markets in which that's totally true, like Facebook, for example. But there are many, many, many more, in my opinion, like airlines, in which like there hasn't been a monopoly. You know, like I think it depends a lot of the time, and I think there's trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in opportunity, and software has like barely started, in my opinion. And so it's like, I don't know. I'm not super concerned about that. But I do think, yeah, it's like I think I could have built it. Would have taken a lot longer. And you know, like even if you go back to like, let's go to that graph. Like just look at when like, you know, our take on revenue is like 7%, right? So it's like 7% of 2 million, let's say, is like, I don't know, what is that? 140 or $14,000? 140,000. 140,000. Yeah, 140,000. Phew, could have messed that up. And you know, that's like top line, right? Then you sort of cut that in half from, you know, like Stripe, credit card, PayPal, et cetera, fees. It's not a lot of money. It gets pretty low pretty fast when you're building like a payments e-commerce sort of marketplace e-type model with like a pretty small, you know, sub 10% take rate. it's just hard. Like I actually really don't like when people call Gumroad. Some people say like refer to Gumroad as like a bootstrap company, which I think Tyler talked about why that's sort of a misnomer already for all companies. But we raise a lot of money, and like I really respect what people that sort of quote unquote bootstrap do, and I didn't do that. You know, like I basically burned $10 million to build this thing, and like it worked out in which I'm like somehow not the villain, and that's awesome. But I did, you know, like sort of. But I like Gumroad was not a good investment for those investors, and the beauty of the venture model is things like Uber offset things like Gumroad, and that's just the thing that happens. Kind of sucks when you're 9 out of the 10 founders that didn't build Uber and they built Gumroad, but it's just the game. You just have to understand the game. I think the more you understand something, the more you love something. That's my pithy Navalism. And so yeah, I think it's just I don't know. I don't have the answer for you. But I do. It's very difficult to bootstrap a company, in my opinion. Like I left Pinterest and I raised money immediately. I raised $1 million in a month because I was like, I don't want to like dip into my savings at all. You know, I'm so adverse to that. And there's so many ways of raising money now, and accelerators, incubators, and tiny seed fund, and earnest capital, and NDVC, and all sorts of ways that I don't know. When people do that, when they sort of like, I talk to founders every week that are like in debt, credit card debt and stuff, and I'm just like, I would never do that, ever. Like, no way in hell. Which is a privilege. I could kind of do that, but yeah, that's sort of my perspective on it. And you had a question as well?
Yeah, well, we have a question back
Oh.
here first and back here, so.
Okay, you deal with it.
So I love how you changed the definition of success for yourself, but I'm curious, I really resonate with your story, but I'm curious, you know, when you had this idea of success being, you know, building this $1 billion company, and that wasn't a reality for you anymore, just given the kind of inflection point that you had, I'm curious if you experienced a sense of grief over this perhaps loss of a certain identity.
Yeah, totally. I think about that a lot, sort of in an existential way too, because like death is like the ultimate loss of identity. So to me, it's just inevitable. You know, like we're like at some point, everything we do like doesn't matter. That's what I believe, which sort of gives me a peace that like I can just do stuff and it's fine, because it like if I did the most amazing things ever, it would also not really matter. And even if you believe in God, it also doesn't matter, because then you believe that like this mortal experience is like 0.000, you know, it's like 1 out of over infinity in terms of importance. So I think regardless of where you are on the sort of like spiritual spectrum, like it doesn't matter. Which doesn't mean to say that like you shouldn't do anything, just like, I don't know, smoke weed every day or whatever, but it just gives, I don't know, it gives me like a peace that I can try, and like I care, and I want to build this amazing thing and help people because their life experiences do matter to them. But that's like, you know, the sort of the stakes feel lower than they ever have for me. I don't know if that's helpful or uplifting. But yeah, I did. I totally felt like a loss of identity. I had this like idea in my head that I was going to build this thing into a huge company, IPO, go to Sun Valley, meet Bill Gates and all these people, and like get a tattoo of Gumroad on my palm. Like it was that core to my identity. I like designed the logo with that in mind. Like, would this be a cool tattoo? And you know, it is what it is. But sort of being able to separate myself from that, like being like me and Gumroad being Gumroad, and like kind of trying to create a divide in those two things. And I wrote the article that this thing is based on, I wrote in February, or published in February. Like 600,000 people read it. Like more people know me from that article than Gumroad, right? And that just, it feels great because it's like, it is a multi-dimensional thing. It's like, it has all of this context and perspective in it that like just Gumroad is like a thing that no one, you know, just like meeting Allison, who had that quote, like she had a very one-dimensional view of who I was as a person, which is what everyone has when you go on Twitter, right? That's like all you see is these like one-dimensional people, which is not true at all. And one of the great things I learned living in Provo, the most conservative city in America, people aren't sticks. And yeah, it was good to realize that of myself too, that I also didn't need to be this one-dimensional person, for better or worse. Another question?
Yeah, last question.
So where do your relationships stand with the investors aside from KP because they sold for $1? But where do your relationships stand as far as like your ownership and everything? Because it sounds like you kind of got out of the mistake clean, aside from the TechCrunch article. Then now you can do what you want, I guess. Is that what this is? Is that what your situation is now?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, honestly, like I still try to keep people up to date. Like when I was moving to Provo, I was like, hey, I'm going to move to Provo. I know that might be weird. You probably don't have founders moving to Provo all the time to write and paint. It was strange probably to them. But at the end of the day, like the great thing about the venture model is the fact that like if you aren't one of those sort of rocket ship companies that's going to make their fund, like they don't care that much about you. They just don't. Like I remember raising money, and I was actually talking to another friend who also has raised a bunch of money, and is doing sort of better than Gumroad, but not as good as Slack or something like that, let's say. And sort of we had this same sort of identical experience with raising money, which I want to write about. But basically, we raised money, and we just thought we were like the hot girl at school or whatever, finally, and we just like didn't like. We thought, I don't know, something would change, I guess. Like, and then like life is the same when you have $7 million in your bank account than when you didn't. And VCs, you realize like their job is to get equity in companies, right? And so once they get equity in companies, like they go on to get equity in more companies. Like it's a sales job basically. And so once they've closed the sale, like they forget about you, just like if they sold a house, right? Just kind of the same thing. And that's just what any portfolio model is like that. If you're managing artists, right? Sort of same shtick probably. Until you do really well, in which their time can sort of actually inflect the company, and like Uber can turn from a $55 billion company to a $65 billion company if they hire this executive, whatever. But most of the time they don't care about you at all, which is that's not even a negative thing. I'm just saying it's just an observation. And yeah, it was just like we were like the cool thing. We were like having all this success, all these VCs. Like I was meeting all these crazy people that I've read about in books, and they were all trying to give me money. And then I took the money, and then it was like, okay, I have money, and that's it. You get invited to dinners, you get invited to CEO summits once in a while. You meet some cool people, but it's not going to make your business or break your business. At the end, I used to believe that like venture capital was like smart money. Like that was sort of the pitch that venture capitalists used to make. But I think it's mostly capital. It's like venture capital. In all caps, and that's just what it is, for better or worse. It's just money. So anyways, to actually answer your question, I know I'm probably running over, but that's what happens at these things anyways. I try to be friendly. I try to give them opportunities. Like whenever I'm in San Francisco, I'm like, hey, let's hang out. Like you're still an investor in the company. If you're ever interested in selling back your stock, like we'd love to buy back or like come to an agreement. We have done that at a 1x sort of return. So they like literally, besides inflation, have sort of netted out. We did that to our former employees that had exercised and were like, in the hole. We made that, sort of netted that out for them as well, which is cool. But it's sort of like, they're kind of like, let us know when you do your next thing and we'll give you a bunch of money again if you want it. It's sort of the way it goes. Straight up. I guess that's it.
Yeah.
I'm Sahil. I'll be around, so you can talk to me if you have more questions in face-to-face, or you can DM me on Twitter.